welcome to Unchurched with Pastor Todd. I'm that guy, really glad to be spending this time with you today. We'll do a little bit of light work today and explore what he said about divorce. We're in a series called What He Said, where I'm working to explore what Jesus actually said, and sometimes didn't say, about life, God, and the meaning of everything. And so I'm working from the Gospels of Matthew, Mark, and Luke, and I'm working from a really cool translation, doing everything I can to kind of get down to brass tacks. What did he say about some of the key issues that make life what it is? If you've been enjoying this series, please share it with your friends. And hey, I'd love to be growing our subscriber base. One of the best things you can do to help support this channel is to simply become a subscriber. It costs you nothing, doesn't take more than a couple seconds, but makes a huge difference to us. So click that like and subscribe button on YouTube, and please accept my sincere thanks for that as we look to get these sermons in front of more and more people, encourage as many people as we can by helping them discover their place in the big story of God. Divorce touches most people's lives. I was thinking about it as I was working on this sermon, like racking my brain to think of any one of my friends. I was thinking about the couples that we have, lifelong relationship with, and I couldn't think of even one whose life had not been touched in some way by divorce. Either their parents divorced or their spouse's parents divorced. Some of my friends have divorced. Everybody I know, their life has been touched by divorce, and that's probably true of you. Perhaps you have been divorced, perhaps your parents were divorced. My wife's parents divorced when she was 12 years of age, and that's a significant part of her story, and much of her journey as a wife and a mom has been directly impacted by her experience of her parents' divorce. I grew up in a movement that was very harsh with people who'd been divorced. In the movement I grew up in, you couldn't be a pastor if you had been divorced. That denomination kind of took extremely literally Paul's teaching on elders, where an elder needs to be the husband of one wife. I tend to think what Paul is saying there is that you need to be the husband of one wife at a time, but they interpreted that as if you're ever divorced, you're unfit to be a pastor. And man, did that cause just huge damage. I personally know people whose families were shunned from their churches because their family went through a divorce. Think about how terrible that was. One thing, your family is going through a significant change. Some might say, it's falling apart. And then to have your church shun you because of that, it's just terrible. So I really hope to perhaps repair some of that damage today, or help you take a step towards repairing some of that damage, and then also shed some light in terms of how you can think about divorce, how you can think about it in terms of the friends that you know who are going through it or who have gone through it. And maybe you are in a situation right now in your marriage where you're thinking about divorce, and there's some things we learn in today's text from what Jesus had to say about it that I hope might inform your journey in a life-giving way. So here's what he said about divorce. We're in the Gospel of Mark. I'm going to stay standing today because I got a weird little microphone pack thing going on. I'm afraid if I sit down, it might stop working. So I'm going to stay standing today. We're in the Gospel of Mark. We're in chapter 10, so if you want to open up your Bible, that's where we are. I'm using the Voos translation right here, really cool translation. It uses every word necessary to communicate the point Jesus was trying to make. We're in Mark chapter 10, verses 1 through 12. So this is where Jesus talks about divorce. And from there, Jesus was by the sea. Having arisen, he comes into the regions of Judea. So he headed south from Galilee towards Jerusalem and across the Jordan. And again, crowds journeying along with him come constantly to him. And as was his custom, he again was constantly teaching them. So he's being followed by crowds at this point. He's truly a rock star. And having come to him, Pharisees, so these are the religious elite dudes, Pharisees kept on asking him whether it is lawful for a man to dismiss a wife, putting him to the test. So they're testing him in the matter of divorce. And he answering, Jesus answering, said to them, "What did Moses command you?" And they said, "Moses permitted a writing of a bill of divorce and to dismiss her." And Jesus said to them, "On account of your hard-heartedness, he wrote this commandment for you. But from creation's beginning, a male and a female he made them. On account of this, a man shall leave behind his father and his mother, and the two shall become one flesh. So that no longer are they two, but one flesh. That therefore which God yoked together, let no man separate. And in the house, again, the disciples kept on asking him concerning this. And he says to them, whoever puts away his wife and marries another woman commits adultery against her. And if she herself, having put away her husband, marries another man, she commits adultery. So we're going to introduce a little section from Matthew in just a minute. So from that, it sounds like he's like, no, go, right? Can't do it. In Matthew, he actually doesn't forbid it entirely. He allows it in certain situations. So we'll kind of bookend the sermon with that section from Matthew, so stay tuned for that. But it's safe to say that he has a very low view of divorce. He's not a fan. So he doesn't forbid it completely. We'll come to that. But he's definitely not a fan. Before we jump into what he said about it, I just want to point out that the Pharisees are testing him again. It just struck me as I was writing. I was like, man, isn't that so like you and me, always testing God? I know we do it in kind of simple and benign ways, but I thought, how about we try something different? Instead of testing God, how about we just obey him? And I think that's part of the central tension, isn't it? Right? The distance between testing God, disbelieving him and testing him, and just simply obeying God. And I just thought I'd share that in case you're on a journey where you've been testing the limits, trying to go your own way. It hasn't been really working out for you. Maybe it's time to just stop it and try obedience. It'd be a totally different story, right? If the Pharisees were quick to obey Jesus, but they're not. They're always quick to test him. So if you're thinking about divorce, I want to be really sensitive here. Like, I'm not trying to hammer anybody. I really want to try and be helpful. If you are thinking about divorce, so whether you're considering it in your own marriage, whether you're thinking about it after the fact, trying to recover from it, whether you know somebody who's in either of those situations, here's some things to remember. One, you need to remember the idea of authority. Okay, if you're thinking about divorce, remember authority. We get this out of verse 3. They ask him if it's lawful to divorce a wife, and he says to them, what did Moses command? So here he's appealing to their highest authority. As Pharisees, they were experts in the law of Moses, and they would have judged everything in life according to what Moses had to say. So instead of what he said, talking about Jesus, they would have truly been like, what did Moses say? So he appeals to their authority. Their authority would have been Moses and the law of Moses. What I love about this is, if you think about the big story of Jesus, he appeals to the authority that he's about to upend. That's a big part of what Jesus was doing. His whole ministry, well, not his whole ministry, but a big part of his ministry was upending the law of Moses, saying, this is what you have been taught, but I'll show you a better way. This is what you have been doing, but I'm calling you to do things differently. What did Moses command you? He appeals to their authority, and in just a second here, he's going to upend their authority, and he's really going to place himself and his way as the new authority. So it's not that Jesus frees us from authority. I know that we all have a secret part of our heart where we would love for that to be true, like, yay, he whom the Son has set free is free indeed. She whom the Son has set free is free indeed, meaning we're totally free from any kind of authority. We can do whatever we want to do. I think it's pretty clear that what's wrong with the world is that we have so many of us running around doing what we want to do, not subject to authority in any way, shape, or form. That's not what Jesus is about. He's not about loosing us from authority altogether. Instead, he's about placing himself as the authority over his people. Jesus is the new authority, and his law is love. So something really beautiful happening here. He's appealing to the Pharisees' authority, the law of Moses, and he's going to teach them and his followers a whole new way. He's going to insert himself as the new authority, and we'll learn later in the story of Jesus that the new law, okay, Moses, of course, was the framer of the Mosaic law, of the Jewish law. Jesus is going to introduce a new law, which I love to refer to all the time. It's from Matthew 22, verses 37 through 40. His new law is love, to love God with everything you've got, and to love your neighbor as you love yourself. Jesus is the new authority, and his law is love. This is where the way of Jesus really speaks to the divorce journey. I've been married 25 years. if I've learned anything about being married, dare I say happily married, it's that death to self truly is the pathway. In laying my life down for my wife, she has found great joy. In laying her life down for me, I have found great joy. And together, as we have slowly learned to surrender our self, capital S, to Jesus, and to give ourself away to one another, we have discovered the magic of self-giving love that does no harm. I can testify from personal experience that the way of Jesus has transformed my and Nikki Candelon's marriage. Self-giving love that does no harm. And that law comes from Jesus, who should be the authority that you are submitted to. So, as you're thinking about divorce, just kind of spend some time thinking about where you're at with authority. Whose authority are you sitting under? Is that authority a productive one? Is that an authority that teaches you the way of self-giving love, or is the authority that you are under, even if it's your own authority, teaching you something altogether different? And let's be honest, if you're living under any law but love, you're living under a destructive law. Next thing to do, second point here, as you think about divorce, is to consider your heart. So he says, then what did Moses say? They say, well, Moses permitted us to issue a certificate of divorce and to dismiss a wife. That law, if you will, has grown down the years in Judaism into such a dismissive status that you can almost divorce a wife by just saying, I divorce you, I divorce you, I divorce you. Just literally that kind of casual, you write her a certificate of divorce and it's over. That's really the central tension at work in this text here. When Jesus is reacting against divorce, I think he's really reacting against that kind of casual dismissing of a woman. It's important for us to remember that in the New Testament context, a woman had no status as compared to her husband. She was of no legal status. She owned no property. She was really the property of her husband. And so you can imagine the devastating consequences to a woman in the first century if her husband, just because he felt like it, decided to dismiss her. It was almost a sentence of death. And so Jesus is really reacting to that kind of casual approach to dismissing a woman that was very common in the Judaism of his day. So they say, yeah, Moses said we could dismiss her, just write her a certificate and we're good. And then he says something very, very interesting in verse 5. On account of your hard-heartedness, he wrote this for you. Because your hearts are hard. So he doesn't say that Moses didn't write the law, but he explains to them why Moses wrote the law. Because your hearts are hard. This is very resonant, from that day to this. It's possible, if you find yourself in a situation where your marriage is suffering, that your heart has become hardened towards your partner. And there's almost nothing more soul-killing than feeling that someone's heart has become hard towards you. Now, I've never experienced this in my marital relationship, but I have experienced it in friendships. I have experienced it in working relationships, where previously I had what I thought was a great relationship with somebody, and then suddenly, and I know it's not sudden, it's, because of events that happened, and I'm sure there's reasons on both sides, but all of a sudden you realize that their heart has grown cold towards you, or in Jesus' language here, their heart has become hardened towards you. It's because of the hardness of your heart that he wrote this statute for you. So as you're thinking about divorce, I just wanted to invite you, because of what Jesus said about it, to consider the state of your heart. And if there's any way you can open your heart up again to your partner, that would be a good thing to try. I've used this example before, but maybe you're tuning into me for the first time today, you've never heard it. But we have a friend who was going through a very difficult journey in their relationship, marital relationship. There'd been some unfaithfulness, and so what our friend did, they were right on the verge of divorcing their partner. And I don't know where the idea came from, but they got the idea to start writing down, one positive thing a day about their partner. And so they would write, one day they have whatever, nice arms. as simple and, seemingly pathetic as that. They are gentle with the kids. And wouldn't you know it, over time, as this friend of ours kind of stacked those, and it's important to say that they put those little things in a jar that they could notice. And what began to happen, of course, you already know the end of the story, is that the good things began to accumulate. And wouldn't you know it, but once you got 10, 20, 30, 40 good things that you've noticed and written down, meaning you've kind of received them into your heart, those things about your partner that are good, that begins to open your heart to them again. That begins to soften your heart towards them. So I'm not saying I know that it's possible, but I'm saying it might be worth your time as you're thinking about divorce to consider your heart and to see if there's any way that you can open your heart to your partner. Again, all of us, regardless of where we're at on this journey, need to manage our hearts. It's very easy for our hearts to become hard. I was thinking about this week. I was just thinking about, how in a professional context, it's easy for me to get focused on getting the job done. It's easy for me to get focused on being efficient and effective. And there's a constant tension there for my heart to become hard because I'm task-oriented when really I'm working with people to get the task done. And that's a constant push and pull. And the busier you are and the higher the stakes are, the easier it's going to be for your heart to become hardened. So consider your heart. You got to manage that. And also, as you think about divorce, consider the deeper way. Okay, the deeper way. We get this out of verses 6 through 9. I was thinking about Aslan here and the deeper magic that he talks about in The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. Here's verses 6 through 9. But from creation's beginning, that's where I get the deep magic part from C.S. Lewis. From creation's beginning, a male and a female he made them. On account of this, a man shall leave behind his father and his mother, and the two shall become one flesh, so that no longer are they two, but one flesh. That therefore which God yoked together, let no man separate. From creation's beginning, he's appealing here to the very big, very old story of God and his people. C.S. Lewis in The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, after the witch and her minions have killed Aslan, the great lion, Lucy and Susan, the two Pevensey daughters, are mourning by the corpse of Aslan. And it gets so horrible. You may remember the story. The mice come and cut the bonds that held him and become talking mice, from whence descended Reepicheep the Great. But it gets so horrible, the night gets so cold that they kind of go for a walk to warm themselves up. And as they do, they hear this great crack and the sun begins to rise, and before they know it, they meet the resurrected Aslan, and they're just completely blown away. They're like, but Aslan, you were dead. What about the deep magic? And the deep magic, of course, referring to the fact that the witch had a right to Edmund's life because of the sin he had committed. And Aslan, of course, offered his life in place of Edmund's to satisfy the deep magic. And the witch thought that was it. It's over. Aslan is dead. It's a wonderful moment. He looks at the girls and says, but there's a deeper magic. And the witch had no idea. Consider the deeper magic. So consider the deeper story. It's very easy for us to get hung up on the niceties of religion and the specifics of our particular doctrinal approach, and the things that we think are really a big deal and the things that we think aren't really a big deal, forgetting the depths of the story of God, forgetting the beauty of the deep story of God. From creation's beginning, he made them male and female. Now, I know, look, we live in an era when this whole idea of male and female, it's definitely being explored in our culture. Are there other alternatives? Are there other ways to think about humanity? In some ways, it's kind of very chic these days to question that natural order of things. If Jesus said, from my perspective, that from creation's beginning, he made them male and female, that's a pretty strong case for me to say, I think that's how nature has been organized. Of course, I often talk about us being east of Eden here, that on the other side of the fall in the garden, all bets are off and the world has been broken. And I do think there are many people who fit somewhere outside of that clear, original design. But I wanted to just remind you that from Jesus' perspective, what he said is that there's a design and there is a designer. And so maybe wrestle with that a little bit. And look, while you're wrestling with that a little bit, make sure for yourself to keep in mind the deeper way of the kingdom of God. Remember that the law ultimately is love. Jesus is the new authority and his law is love. So when you're interacting with people who are perhaps outside the margins of what you think is normative, make sure that you interact with those people and everyone that you encounter, particularly those who hold a different viewpoint than you. Interact with them according to the law of love. Loving God and loving them as you learn to love yourself with everything you've got. But I think in light of the big story, in light of the deeper magic, I think a little humility is in order. So wherever you sit on this, if you're very much on the exploration train these days and you have very little patience for people perhaps like me who would embrace what Jesus said here about the natural order of things, or if perhaps you're even further to the right of where I might be and you're really ardent about if it's not this way, then it's not okay. Let's give each other some grace. Let's treat each other with kindness. Why? Because we're caught up in a very big story here, and I'm sure that there is much to it that has not yet been revealed that one day will be, which is why I love the Chronicles of Narnia so much. So, a little humility in light of the deeper way. I also want you, as you think about divorce, to consider, this is the fourth point here, deeply the concept of inseparable union. This is what Jesus is talking about in verse 8. It says, and the two shall become one flesh. The two shall become one flesh. So typically here we're talking about sex, intercourse, physical intimacy. For this reason, a man shall leave his father and his mother and be united to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. He goes on, right? So he's basically saying eventually, in a marriage founded on the law of love, the two disappear and there's one person left. We've been experiencing this recently. It's so funny. Nikki and I will often just randomly and sillily complete each other's sentences. Like she'll be talking to the kids and I'll be in another room and I'll walk in, I'll hear the end of the sentence and we'll both say, boom, the punchline, even though we weren't part of the conversation. Why? Because the two shall become one flesh. I just think it's important to say, and I know this might not be popular to say, but it's my channel and I'll cry if I want to. In the biblical perspective, sex is marriage. Okay, so we don't see many like Christian wedding ceremonies in the Bible. In fact, we don't see any. Right? I'm thinking of the wedding in Cana, but that's a Jewish one. So like we don't see a marriage ceremony like we have come to expect a marriage ceremony to be in the Christian West in the last 150 years, 200 years or so. Really, in the Bible, when someone sleeps with someone else, basically that's the one flesh union. And so in a promiscuous society like ours, in a permissive society like ours, and look, our society's been this way for a long time now, right? Like it's been a very long time that sexuality has just become so common, so normal, so much a part of life. I just want to say that what he said is that the two shall become one flesh. So what I get from this, and I want to share this with you pastorally, not in a condemnatory way at all, but I just want to invite you, in light of what he said about sex and marriage, to be really careful about who you get naked with. Like, be really careful about that. Because Jesus seems to think like there's something sacred going on. That when you're exposed to another person in that way, something really special is happening, something really miraculous is happening. And if you're tempted to say, oh, come on, Todd, that's so old-fashioned. Yeah, it's very old-fashioned. In fact, from creation's beginning, he made them male and female. For this reason, a man shall leave his father and his mother and be united to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. That's been inserted right into the marriage ceremony. Clearly, Jesus thinks that it's a very ancient concept. So I make no apology for that. And so, just think about it. If you're a young person and you've been treating sex very casually, maybe try something different. I mean, what do you got to lose? You've already been treating it very casually. Maybe reverse course and see if taking what Jesus said about this a little more seriously, brings more life or less life into your life. And above all, don't treat divorce casually. As we close, this is what he's talking about in verses 11 through 12. So here they are right here, verse 11. And he says to them, "Whoever puts away his wife and marries another woman commits adultery against her. And if she herself, having put away her husband, marries another man, she commits adultery." So here's where we come to the part I promised off the top, where Jesus talks about this in the Gospel of Matthew. So this is the same kind of sequence. It's shorter in Matthew, but here's what he says about divorce in Matthew. This is in Matthew chapter 5, verses 31 and 32. "Furthermore, it has been said, whoever divorces his wife, let him give her a certificate of divorce." So he's referring exactly to what the Pharisees said. Hey, you can just give her a certificate of divorce and you're good. "But I say to you," see, I'm upending the old way. Here's my new way. Okay, "But I say to you, whoever divorces his wife for any reason except sexual immorality causes her to commit adultery. And whoever marries a woman who is divorced commits adultery." So he's saying, look, sexual immorality, that's a pretty big deal. Why? Because he believes that sex kind of is marriage, that it is the foundation of the beginning of the one flesh union. So he seems to think that if someone breaks that aspect of the marriage commitment, they've broken something very, very real. And in that sense, sometimes a marriage is broken. My dad taught me this. I remember when I was a young boy talking to my dad about divorce. He said, "Son, sometimes as a pastor, you just got to be honest with people. Sometimes you will encounter a marriage that is truly and irreparably broken." So I do think that Jesus permits divorce. He does here explicitly, okay? In the case of adultery, he permits it. In the case of sexual immorality, he permits it. But if we go back to the text we were working from originally in Mark, he is very serious about not approaching this casually. So, as you are thinking about divorce, take it real serious. I think in our culture, it's easy perhaps to think of divorce as a quick fix. Maybe talk to some people who've gone through divorce before you take another step in that direction. Ask them how it went for them. Ask them about the consequences in their life, and if there were kids, the consequences in their kids' lives. Look, if you're not in counseling, maybe consider doing that. My wife is a psychotherapist. I know that she and her peers are ready and willing to engage with you as you try and figure out why your heart has become hardened to your spouse. I just can't say it enough. You have to figure out how to die to yourself. There's no way you can live for someone else while you're living for yourself. And that's the cost of marriage, my man. That's the cost of marriage, my woman, is you laying your life down for the sake of your partner. Now look, if you have been divorced, I just want to say, it is not an irreparable roadblock to redemption. It's not. Okay? Jesus loves you. He sees you. There's room in his family for you, regardless of what's happened in your life when it comes to divorce. So don't think that somehow you're untouchable. Don't think that somehow you have a scarlet letter on you and you could never be accepted in God's family. Totally untrue. If there's a big theme in Jesus' ministry, it's that he welcomed outcast people. He welcomed outsiders. He welcomed those who thought that they were unwelcome in his family. So there is room for you. Come to Jesus. Don't stay outside in the dark alone. It's okay. Divorce is just another broken thing in a world full of broken things. And I am dealing with my own brokenness, just like you are dealing with your own brokenness. And someone dealing with divorce is no different than someone dealing with pride, is no different than someone dealing with, irredeemable anger issues, is no different than someone who loves money, is no different than, right? We are all in need of mercy. We are all in need of God's grace. So don't allow yourself to feel disqualified. And if you've been dealing with someone who's divorced and you haven't been dealing with them gently, you haven't been dealing with them according to the law of love, today's your chance to stop it and to start fresh and to love them with everything you've got. Okay? There's room. He sees you. He knows you. He loves you. You can find a way through. And next week, what he said about childlikeness.